Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Illuminati. The man who rules the world takes on the head of the global elite in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes Illuminati on Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. New York politicians are starting to rethink their stance on sanctuary cities after a crime spree by migrants.
But we're going to begin with a terrifying video of a woman being dragged across the street while she was being robbed. Tonight, cops are arresting several migrants for dozens of robberies all across New York City.
Eyewitness News reporter Jim Dolan with what could happen to those migrants.
From Sheepshead Bay to Lower Manhattan, police say a gang of recent migrants from Venezuela terrorized New Yorkers, robbing them violently and then hacking their phones to drain bank accounts of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Police say this is one part of one migrant gang, and there are others.
In recent months, a wave of migrant crime has washed over our city. But they are, nonetheless, preying on New Yorkers and making our city less safe.
Here, a thief on a moped violently steals a purse, but most importantly, a phone. The phone is then hacked to drain the person's bank accounts. This one pattern has nearly 150 victims, but is part of a larger pattern of criminal gangs police say they have discovered in the migrant community.
They're essentially ghost criminals. No criminal history, no photos, no cell phone, no social media. Sometimes we're even unclear on a name or a date of birth.
This network of thieves predominantly live in the migrant shelter system. They use social media platforms to organize and coordinate their thefts.
The increase in crimes committed by migrants has some wondering if bills signed into law under Mayor de Blasio that prevent the NYPD from cooperating with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, should be reconsidered.
These sanctuary city policies are ridiculous. They're impeding our law enforcement, our officials. They're making those same law enforcement officials less safe, and by consequence, they're making all of us less safe.
That's a question that should be presented to the council.
The mayor recently has shown some openness to reestablishing some cooperation with ICE, but the de Blasio-era laws tie his hands. In the meantime,
it doesn't matter if a person is a migrant, asylum seeker, or if the person is a long-term New Yorker. You break the law, it would be investigated, and it would be handled by our criminal justice system.
It's not clear yet if City Council has any appetite for reversing the de Blasio-era sanctuary city laws, but an increase in violent crime committed by some of the recent migrants to New York City could at least force the discussion.
Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, The Man Crisis. Learn why so many men are struggling to find their way in an increasingly gynocentric world in The Man Crisis. Get your copy of The Man Crisis in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. Now available in paperback. From the author of the critically acclaimed book The Man Crisis comes The Woman Crisis. Learn why so many women have become lost in their quest to have it all in The Woman Crisis. Get your copy of The Woman Crisis in paperback at Amazon.com and online booksellers today. Now, in the aftermath of the alleged assault on police officers by migrants and the crime spree shown of migrants participating in the robbery and assault of New Yorkers, many of the New York politicians, like New York Mayor Eric Adams, New York Governor Kathy Hochul, members of the New York City City Council, and New York State Legislature, are starting to rethink their stance on migrants as related to the enforcement of laws, as related to immigration, customs, and enforcement. Now, back when Mayor Bill de Blasio was in charge, he established a policy of sanctuary cities where as New York City being a sanctuary city, it would be a place where New York City would not legally go out and work with immigration's customs and enforcement to deal with people who entered the country illegally and work with them towards getting these individuals arrested and deported if they possibly wound up committing a crime. However, in the aftermath of the assault on 2 New York City police officers by migrants and the crime spree shown of gangs of migrants participating in criminal activity, including assaulting individuals allegedly on scooters and allegedly participating in a ring to steal people's cell phones, to drain their bank accounts by hacking their phones. Many politicians like New York Governor Kathy Hochul are now calling for many of these migrants who possibly do commit crimes to be deported. However, what prevents them from getting these individuals on a road to deportation is the law established in Bill de Blasio's sanctuary city policy that prevents local governments like New York City from being able to work with federal organizations like immigration, customs, and enforcement. Now, Eric Adams, the current mayor, wants to say that because this law is on the books, it ties his hands, but that's complete bullshit. And it's complete bullshit because when it comes to the sanctuary city law in and of itself, the sanctuary city law in and of itself is unconstitutional. And the sanctuary city law is unconstitutional because the sanctuary city law that tells local government it cannot work with the federal government violates the policy of the overall government as related to the Constitution. Now, when it comes to our United States Constitution, the United States Constitution clearly states that federal supersedes state and that the state or the city cannot interfere with the process of the federal government. And with immigration, customs, and enforcement being under the jurisdiction of the federal government, it is by law for the city to allow federal enforcement of federal laws to be made by ICE as related to dealing with individuals who have entered the country illegally. So the entire law that was established by the de Blasio administration back in the 2018 or 2016 or so in an effort to spite Donald Trump in a virtue signal in and of itself was completely unconstitutional, and this law could easily just be wiped out by just a simple challenge in federal court. However, New York politicians don't want to be held accountable for the complete failure of the sanctuary city, because that's the only reason why they're trying to weasel out of the sanctuary city that they all stood behind as far back as last year. And as they stood by that policy, they were all happy to stand behind that policy because that allowed them a chance to virtue signal and say that they were not racist like former President Donald Trump. However, as they were getting in their feelings as related to Donald Trump, they were not really critically thinking about the law. And as they were not critically thinking about the law, politicians like Kathy Hochul and New York Mayor Eric Adams wanted to go out and play political games with people's lives as Governor Greg Abbott began sending migrants up to New York City. And as they sought to virtue signal and win a PR war against those in the red party, these members of the blue party began inviting migrants into New York City. And as they began inviting migrants into New York City, what happened was they thought they could handle all of these migrants until March of 2023, where the city started to become overwhelmed. And as the city's homeless services became overwhelmed and they started to have a drain on their fiscal resources as related to their fiscal budget, this is where politicians like Eric Adams, the cream of wheat man, started to realize that he was cooked. And as he realized that he was starting to get cooked fiscally and was not going to get any support from the Biden administration to pay for the care of these migrants, this is where the situation started to get bad for Eric Adams, who later in the year started to claim that the migrant crisis would destroy New York City. And over the last year or so, the migrant crisis has basically destroyed the quality of life in New York City, turning New York City from a halfway struggling city to a just place filled with squalor on the level of the 1970s and 1980s, and also starting to fill it with crime from many of these migrants who have not been vetted, migrants who have not been checked as related to their background, migrants who have not been processed through the ICE system, and many of these migrants basically are now forming what are called ghost gangs because they have no identification, no records, and no real way to track them. And with no real way to track them, these criminals can basically operate anonymously all throughout New York City as pickpockets, as muggers, and all sorts of assorted criminals, terrorizing residents all across the city. And because they are anonymous, they can go out here and commit crimes like assaulting police officers because nobody knows who they are, and because they give aliases, they can go out here and take advantage of our legal system due to weak prosecutors like Alvin Bragg, who go out and give migrants a ability to leave jail without any sort of bail for assaulting a police officer, and that allows those migrants to go out here and migrate to other blue cities, in some cases at the expense of the city, because Eric Adams offered them a ticket to anywhere they wanted to go. So this whole situation has turned into a complete disaster for all of the New York City members of the Blue Party, and as it has turned into a complete disaster for all of the members of the Blue Party, what they are looking to do is try to weasel out of the situation. And as they try to weasel out of the situation, they don't want to be the ones who have to actively concede that their whole sanctuary city policy is a failure. And now they're looking to try to find a way to get out of the sanctuary city. And they know the only way out of it is to actually either repeal this law, which would basically put a target on every one of these politicians who voted for its backs and the ones who supported it, like Eric Adams and Kathy Hochul, because their opponents can easily just run tape of all of the crime and associate it directly with them. And politicians like Eric Adams, the cream of wheat, man, this is basically we're going to lead to his end, because any smart opponent would just keep playing the tape of him shaking the hands of migrants at the bus stop, and the tape of him saying the migrant crisis would destroy New York City, and then follow it up with the assault of the police officers, and that in 2025 would basically lead to the end of Eric Adams in a primary and lead to us getting a red mayor possibly. Moreover, what could also happen is many of these city council members, now that they are starting to concede that this policy is a failure, could wind up with their jobs in jeopardy, along with members of the New York State legislature, because this sanctuary law are all created by members of the Blue Party, and this could lead to a bloodbath, and this is what could happen to them, because it's clear that the sanctuary city that was set up by Bill de Blasio was one that was destined to fail, because it was a policy based on feelings about Donald Trump without any critical thinking about how to be able to manage a large population of individuals who entered the country illegally. Individuals who were invited into New York City by the mayor, the governor, and the city council. Individuals who took advantage of an open door that was open to them by politicians to, again, caught up in their feelings about Donald Trump, to think objectively about this entire situation, a situation that, again, could easily be solved because when you look at this whole policy of saying, oh, you don't want to work with ICE, again, this is a law that in and of itself is unconstitutional. And it's unconstitutional because, again, when we look at the structure of the United States as related to the Constitution, federal was designed to supersede state and city. And when it comes to a city ordinance that impedes federal agents from being able to do their job, that city ordinance is completely unconstitutional and is completely invalidated, similar to the jab mandate Eric Adams kept on New York City, while the rest of the country clearly stated that this law was unconstitutional. And this sanctuary city policy is just as unconstitutional, but many New York politicians don't want to concede their failure, because to concede failure means to admit accountability, and to admit accountability means that many of these blue politicians would basically be out of a job in the next election. And that's the reason why many of these politicians are trying to weasel out of this whole situation, trying to worm their way out of this, because they know that the entire migrant crisis has become a complete disaster, a disaster that is basically building up on election years for people like Mayor Eric Adams and the city council, because they were the ones who signed off on these dysfunctional policies like sanctuary cities. And now that we see that these sanctuary city policies have failed, because New York has become an Arkham asylum where the inmates are running the asylum, and we're seeing chaos on the levels of 1980s New York City. Now we see many of these politicians saying, oh, we cannot handle giving migrants asylum with local individuals because we need the help of ICE because these criminals are out of control. Well, duh, when it comes to the migrants, you need the help of Immigration's Customs and Enforcement, because Immigration's Customs and Enforcement, it's their job to vet many of these migrants. It's their job to find out where this individual came from. It's their job to find out about their background. And they do this because they want to keep the country safe on a federal level, because when it comes to boundaries like the border, we need ICE to protect us as related to the border, because that's the first boundary, and that first boundary is there to protect the nation from not only these criminals, but also people who are threats to national security, such as terrorists and such as drug smugglers and sex traffickers. That is the job of Immigration's Customs and Enforcement. But we had a group of people who were like Bill de Blasio, who thought that they knew better than the federal government. And because they thought they knew better than the federal government, that he thought, oh, I don't need to talk to ICE. And that really showed why he was not fit to be the mayor of New York City. When a guy who's supposed to be the mayor of New York City wants to say that he doesn't want to work with federal officials and the city council co-signs on it, that shows you have an incompetent city council and an incompetent mayor, because any smart mayor as related to federal matters wants those matters handled by professionals who are trained to deal with them. And while many of these people on the far left, like Bill de Blasio, want to believe that ICE is racist, ICE has a clear job as related to protecting the nation, and they have been doing their job as related to border patrols and Immigration's and Customs Enforcement. And their job is to make sure that people don't come across our borders illegally, and they don't have the infrastructure or the ability to create infrastructure and networks to be able to participate in criminal behavior. So when people like Kathy Hochul go out here and say, oh, they want these individuals deported, no, we should have never invited them. No, we should have never invited these individuals, because inviting these individuals only opens the door for them to further violate our laws, because they entered the country illegally. And with that border opened by the Biden administration's apathy, what has happened is you have people on the state and local level further enable these individuals to believe that they can go out here and break further laws, because if they could break a federal law, then they could believe they could break a state law, and if they believe they could break a state law, they'll break a city law, because since they don't have to respect the ICE agent, they believe they don't have to respect a New York City police officer. And this is all policy created by politicians like Kathy Hochul, like Eric Adams, like the New York State Legislature, and like the New York City Council. They created all of these policies by opening the door, and now that they realize the chaos that they created by opening the door, what they want to do is try to find a way to close it without ever being held accountable for their actions and their decisions. Now, I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. Nobody's going to give you a pass for creating the chaos that destroyed the quality of life in New York City, because we can clearly directly see who is connected to this chaos. We see that it started with Andrew Cuomo and Bill de Blasio's efforts to spite Donald Trump, as they were caught up in their feelings about Donald Trump running for president and showing how not racist they were. But both of those men are gone. However, Kathy Hochul and Eric Adams willfully and intentionally towed the party line, and Eric Adams willfully and intentionally went out here and invited migrants in with the support of the city council. And now he wants to backtrack and say, oh, it's up to the city council to get rid of the sanctuary city policy. Well, all you need is one challenge in a federal court, and the sanctuary city policy would be declared unconstitutional, and it would be declared unconstitutional because it is impeding in the federal government's ability to govern New York State, because ICE agents are a part of governing the country, and their jurisdiction supersedes the state. So this law never should have been written into law in the first place, or even passed by the city council. But when you're caught up in the thinking of social justice and caught up in your feelings about Donald Trump, you don't think critically or objectively about the law. And that is the sad case here as related to this whole situation. Nobody is thinking critically. Everybody's still stuck up in their emotions. But when you think critically, you understand this whole situation. All of these Blue Party members are accountable for it, and they're accountable for the crime spree and the assault on these police officers. And now that there's a clear paper trail connecting all of these people, they want to backpedal and try to get out of it. But we, the people, have to hold these politicians accountable, because it was their policies that destroyed the quality of life here in New York City. It's their policies that made life here untenable for most New Yorkers, and it was their policy to bring these migrants here to virtue signal against Donald Trump that has led to them basically destroying the quality of life here in New York City. And only a dim-bulb dummy would go out here and vote for these politicians again. But these policies are, again, easily reversible, because if you have a policy that goes against our Constitution, that policy in and of itself has to be eliminated, and again can be eliminated without repeal. Now, they would have to repeal these policies and admit they're the biggest mistake since Prohibition if you want to go that route. But it's clear to me that these laws in and of themselves are unconstitutional, and if they're unconstitutional, all of these migrants can basically be put back on a bus and shipped back to ICE, and let ICE deal with this situation, because dealing with people who enter the country illegally is clearly not a city issue. No, it's a federal issue, and ICE needs to be able to do its job, and the way they do their job is by mounting a federal challenge to declare sanctuary cities unconstitutional once and for all. Now, if you want to pick up some of my positive fiction on the SJS Direct imprint, you can find all of those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Smashworthy iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. And if you'd like to see me make more videos about the migrant crisis, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.